Let us pray. O Lord, grant us the daily awareness of the precious gift of life which you have given us. As members of this Legislative Assembly, we dedicate our lives anew to the service of our province and our country. Amen.
Introduction of visitors.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to introduce to you and through you to the members of the Legislative Assembly Mr. Andrew Morafias Apostle. He is the Secretary General of the International Federation of Social Workers in Geneva. He is in Alberta from June 11th to 15th on a site inspection of the meetings and convention facilities with the view of booking the International Congress of the International Federation of Social Workers in Edmonton in 1994 and 1995. Help us encourage him to bring his convention to Edmonton. He is seated in the Speaker's Gallery and would ask that he rise and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
Member for Banff Cochrane.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure to introduce to you and through you to the members of this Assembly a representative group of the people who have been responsible for the development of the model for incorporation of a town in a national park. They've been making history every step of the way. The process, Mr. Speaker, has been a model of federal, provincial, and local consultation and cooperation as these people have worked as a team to reach this day. I would ask that they stand as I introduce them. They are seated in the Speaker's Gallery. Firstly, representing the Government of Canada, Gary Sargent, the Associate Superintendent of Banff National Park. Representing the Government of Alberta, Archie Grover, the Deputy Minister of Alberta Municipal Affairs. Tom Forgrave, the Assistant Deputy Minister of Municipal Administrative Services, and Tom Lauder, Deputy Director of Municipal Services Branch of Alberta Municipal Affairs. And representing the Banff School District, who have spent considerable volunteer hours to make this a reality, Don Golding, Ted Hart, Brent Baker, and Ozzie Treutler. Mr. Speaker, I would ask that all members give this group the traditional warm welcome of this House.
Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills.
Member for Banff Cochrane.
Mr. Speaker, I'm honored to introduce a historic piece of legislation, Bill number 9, the Parks Town Act. This bill, Mr. Speaker, will provide for the incorporation of Alberta towns in the national parks when agreement has been reached with the Government of Canada and the affected population. In particular, it will enable the incorporation of the town of Banff effective January 1st, 1990, the first municipality to be established inside a national park in Canadian history. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Banff Cochrane has moved first reading of Bill number 9, Parks Towns Act. Those members in favour of first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. So ordered.
Bill number 9, Parks Towns Act, introduced by the Honourable Member Mr. Evans, is now read a first time.
Forgive me, honourable member.
Bill number 9, the Parks Towns Act, be placed on the order paper under Government Bills and Orders.
Having heard the motion, those in favour, please say aye. Opposed, please say no. Carried. Member for Calgary Fish Creek.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request leave today to introduce Bill 233, the Service Dogs Act. The purpose of this bill, Mr. Speaker, is to resolve a long-standing legislative deficiency in our province. Under the provisions of this bill, disabled Albertans, such as the deaf and quadriplegics using service dogs, would no longer be denied with impunity access to public accommodation services and facilities.
Honourable member for Calgary Fish Creek has moved first reading of Bill 233, Service Dogs Act. Those in favour of first reading, please say aye. Opposed, please say no. So ordered.
133, Service Dogs Act, introduced by the Honourable Member Mr. Payne, is now read a first time. Tabling reports.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to table the 1986-87 annual report of Athabasca University and the annual report for the year ending June 30, 1988 for the Medicine Hat College.
Minister of Health.
I am pleased to file with the Assembly 4 copies of the Alberta Registered Dietitians Association annual report for the year ended April 30th, 1988, the 1986 Vital Statistics Annual Review and the 1987 Vital Statistics Annual Review, and to note that members have been previously distributed with copies of these documents.
Introduction of special guests.
Member for Athabasca-Lac-La-Biche.
My pleasure to introduce to you and through you to the members of the Legislative Assembly 49 students from the Fawcett School. They are accompanied by their teachers, Jim Loughy, Nancy Ross, and Roy Woolsey, and also their bus driver, Steve Howard. They are seated in the members' gallery, and I would ask at this time they rise and receive the warm welcome of this Assembly.
Member for Ponoka, Rundy.
On behalf of my colleague, the member for Lacombe, I am pleased to introduce to you and through you to members of the Assembly 15 students from Satinwood School, located just east of the town of Lacombe in the county of Lacombe. They are accompanied by their teacher, Wendy Flewelling, and parent, Ern Russell. Mr. Speaker, they are seated in the public gallery, and I would ask they stand and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
Edmonton Mill Woods, followed by Banff Cochrane.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to introduce to you and the other members of the Assembly this afternoon some 50 students from Mayokamum School in the constituency of Edmonton Mill Woods. They're here today with their teachers, Mrs. Kathy Wright, Mrs. Wendy Truk, and Mr. Vladishenko, and parent Dorothy Schultz. I'd ask them to stand in the gallery now and receive the warm welcome of the House.
Banff Cochrane, followed by the Minister of Family and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was remiss in neglecting to mention two other individuals in the Speaker's gallery who are very large players in the incorporation of the Parks Towns Act. Mr. George Yates, the Director General of Canadian Park Service in Ottawa, I would ask him to stand, and Mr. Jerry McNeil of the Canadian Park Service in Ottawa. Again, Mr. Speaker, I would ask that all of the members of this Assembly join me in welcoming these gentlemen with the traditional welcome of this House.
Minister of Family and Social Services, followed by Calgary Mountain View.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure to introduce to you and through you to the members of the Legislative Assembly, Mr. Mark Nicol, who is the Executive Director of the Social Workers Association of Alberta, and I'm sure he's here to lend support to the Minister of Tourism in our bid for a very important conference, and I would ask Mark to stand in the public gallery and receive the warm reception of this House.
Calgary Mountain View.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure to introduce to members of the Assembly Mr. Nelson Vino and Mrs. Barb Vino, who are visiting Alberta from Lunenburg County in Nova Scotia,
They're seated with my mother, Mrs. Elsie Hawksworth, in the members' gallery. I'd ask them to stand and please give them a warm Alberta welcome. Thank you.
Member for Innisfail.
Mr. Speaker, I take great pleasure today introducing to you, through you, to the members of this Assembly, 25 grade 5 students from Spruce View School and their teacher, Marguerite Baker, and parents, Shirley Lentz, Alfred Snyder, Mary Fleming, Karen Craig, Janice Murphy, and Joanne Evanline. I would like to ask them to stand and receive the traditional welcome from this Assembly.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Speaker, to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, during the recent provincial election, I went around and at every opportunity talked about this government's hidden agenda, Mr. Speaker, that eventually we would pay for it if they came back in the majority government, higher taxes, cut back in people's services, and above all, privatization. You know that word that excites conservatives immensely, Mr. Speaker. Yep. Well, Mr. Speaker, the budget proved that I was right, Mr. Speaker, and now a recent bill brought in by the Minister of Health, Bill 5, also proves we're right about privatization, Mr. Speaker. And I do not recall this Premier going around the province saying, elect me, and we're going to privatize the provincial health facilities. I don't recall that, Mr. Speaker. But that's what they're doing under this bill, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Premier, why weren't you honest with the people of Alberta, and why didn't you tell them during the election that you intended to privatize provincial hospitals in this province?
Mr. Speaker, it's been interesting over the years in the legislature. Many members have discussed with ministers of health opportunities in which they might be able to provide a efficient, effective health delivery system and try to do it in a way that protects the income and the tax situation for Albertans. During the course of those discussions, often ministers have talked of perhaps on a pilot basis, seeing if there is some way to use the private sector to do it in a more efficient way. There certainly has been no commitment by the government in any way to privatizing the healthcare system in Alberta. But there's no question, Mr. Speaker, that governments now and in the future must work very hard to make sure we can deliver a superb healthcare system, but do it in a way that the taxpayers can afford.
Speaker.
Wow, he finally told the truth.
Mr. Speaker, this government does not have a mandate to change the health care system in this province,
Hear,
Mr.
hear.
Speaker. My question to the Premier then, is he admitting then that this Bill 5 is an attempt then to be able to privatize and sell off our public hospitals? Is that what he's saying, Mr. Speaker?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member can try, but that's absolute nonsense. I mean, that is absolute nonsense, and he wants to draw that conclusion, then it must be some dream in his head. I would say, Mr. Speaker, to all members, that one thing about the parliamentary process of dealing with legislation is that we provide a series of times in the House and the legislative process to deal with it. First reading, which we've had, we have second reading, we have third reading, we have committee study of bills, and I invite the honourable member or his colleagues to raise their concerns as the bill proceeds. But don't try and distort the bill by this nonsense that somehow the government is selling off its health care system. That is nonsense.
Has this Premier even read the bill, Mr. Speaker? Is he aware that in Section 11 of Bill 5, the Department of Health Act allows the minister to sell off our provincial hospitals? Is he even aware of that, Mr. Speaker?
Read the bill. Mr. Speaker, as the honourable member should, by reviewing, answered no. I have answered his questions already.
Mr. Speaker, then to the Minister of Health. And for the Premier, we should know that it allows, this particular section allows the Crown to sell, lease, or otherwise any facility to any person or organization. It can even sell patients. We can transfer patients from one to the other, and then we can give it away to our conservative friends, Mr. Speaker. That's all in the bill if he wants to take the time to read it. My question then to the Minister, maybe she's more aware of the bill that she brought in. Can the Minister of Health explain why this legislation is coming in now after provincial election and it was not talked about during the election?
Here, here. Well, Mr. Speaker, I must admit I'm a bit puzzled, not only by the questions, but my ability to answer the questions. There is a bill before this House which will follow the regular route of legislation. And as the Premier has very clearly stated, in terms of the general overall perspective on the bill, of course there is no intention of this government to privatize facilities, and I only need look at the estimates book to show how directly involved this government is in health care in this province. So albeit the Leader of the Opposition has taken a perspective on the legislation, which is incorrect, but I would prefer, unless, and I take your ruling, Mr. Speaker, to deal with it when the bill is before this House. The general statement of the context and the purpose of the bill has been very clearly stated by the Premier.
Speaker, this minister's brought in a bill into this House that's fundamentally changing our system, Mr. Speaker. And we want to know before this is an act, when they can bring in closure, Mr. Speaker, if you didn't intend this in the act, why did you bring it in then?
Mr. Speaker, the disposition of facilities, which is the section under the Act that the Honourable Leader of the Opposition is referring to, is one that frequently occurs in legislation where property is involved in the delivery of services. I will look forward to the debate on the bill in this Assembly.
Be accountable.
Be accountable.
Remember, you had to bring back one other bill when you brought in two-tiered medicine. We're trying to help you out before it's a mistake. And my question is clearly under here, provincial hospitals fall in it. We've checked it out. I can even tell you the ones. And I'm asking this minister then, is she then unaware that you could take a big hospital like Calgary Foothills under this bill and sell it to anybody you want it for $1, whatever you want it under this act, Mr. Speaker? Well, then she better read the act.
That's what it says.
Mr. Speaker, the member is not correct in the assumptions that he's making with respect to provincial hospitals, with respect to the jurisdiction of the Hospitals Act, and now with the bill of the Department of Health Act, which is before this legislature. And all I can say is I look forward to the debate that is going to occur.
Mr. Speaker, the Meech Lake Accord, which the Premier signed 2 years ago, appears to be doomed, and for good reason. That accord requires virtual unanimity in terms of constitutional change, particularly as it affects Alberta's interest in Senate reform. It also, from what we've been able to see, has now great flaws in that a province is able to trample over the rights of minorities. Some provinces, including a province led by a Conservative Premier, have moved to show alternatives and shown courage in moving to propose those alternatives. And Mr. Speaker, very recently the Eastern Premiers have decided not to pursue Meech Lake, to keep it off the agenda of the next First Ministers' Conference. My question to the Premier is this: will the Premier call upon his friend, Prime Minister of Canada, to call a new First Ministers' Conference as soon as possible so that an alternative can be worked out to get rid of this Meech Lake Accord and to get one that's better suited for Western Canada and particularly Alberta? Mr. Speaker, I draw attention to the honourable member that the Meech Lake Accord was not just signed by the government, but in fact was endorsed 100% by the legislature of the province of Alberta. I'd also say, Mr. Speaker, that the negotiations that went into trying to establish a new constitutional reform package for Canada. It took many hours of deliberation and coordination, negotiation. It is sad if it appears that it may have trouble being ratified. However, it was established by First Ministers working together under the chairmanship of the Prime Minister. And now, if the accord does not appear to be progressing as it should, it'll be necessary for the Prime Minister, as chairman, to once again bring together the First Ministers to deal with the issue. We've discussed that, and the Prime Minister is calling such a meeting.
Mr. Speaker, all of the parties in this Assembly agree with Senate reform. Is the Premier prepared to agree to the establishment of a three-party committee that will deal with the expeditious movement of Senate reform to get this thing off the stalled paper and get it moving along, which the Premier hasn't been able to do?
It's interesting, Mr. Speaker, how some members try to get on the bandwagon when they find something that's popular.
That's right.
Mr. Speaker, the government of Alberta was discussing Senate reform many years ago. We were able to first, as one government, one premier promoting Triple-E Senate across this country, move from one premier to 5 premiers now supporting it. I believe we have made a breakthrough in the issues that the Triple-E covers, that is, elective, effective, and equal. We can move a great way along the line to Senate reform through constitutional reform, which is necessary. We're going to keep working for that. I should merely point out to the honourable member as well, Mr. Speaker, that we have here in this legislature an all-party group. Perfect situation if the honourable member wants to raise any matters with regards to Meech Lake or Senate reform. It is here. And, Mr. Speaker, though I want to correct the honourable member's thinking, the government of Alberta has led the way in Senate reform in Canada.
Hear, hear. Mr. Speaker, with the greatest of respect, the Premier has been a failure with respect to Senate reform. Is he prepared to repudiate an agreement that's holding Alberta back and that has flaws that allows a government to trample over minorities? Will he repudiate that agreement?
Mr. Speaker, again, the honourable member talks without knowing what he's talking about.
Again.
The government of Alberta has made sure in all of its progress towards Senate reform and constitutional reform that we will always protect the rights of Albertans, all Albertans, and Canadians during that process.
Pincher Creek, Crow's Nest, followed by Vegreville, then Calgary, Buffalo.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct my question to the Minister of Education. In order for Canada to compete in a world economy increasingly driven by science and technological innovation, it is imperative that we encourage our young people to enter careers in the sciences and engineering. As such, I'm concerned about the talk in our province that the Minister of Education is somehow diluting the quality of science education such that we'll be graduating students who will be functionally illiterate in the sciences. Would the Minister advise the Assembly if he is prepared to stop the erosion of science education in the province by taking strong measures to ensure that an enhanced science curriculum is a top priority of his ministry?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is talking about excellence and demanding excellence in our children's education, and that is precisely what we are trying to achieve. And in order to do that in the sciences, our objective has got to be making sure that they have the very best in science education. And that means making sure that they get basic concepts in physics, in chemistry, and in biology, and in the earth sciences. But it also means going one step further, Mr. Speaker, and applying that basic knowledge to Alberta and Canadian society here today. And it means applying it to the environmental issues, to agriculture and oil and gas, which is the mainstay of our province. It means talking about water and putting science in the context of all of the sciences that are around us in this province. Mr. Speaker, our objective is not to dilute the quality of science education in the province. Instead, it's to strengthen and to promote a far greater understanding, a far greater scientific literacy amongst all of our citizens.
That's right on. Right on. A supplementary question, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister. Many teachers, professors, and scientists have expressed concerns about the science curriculum. Is the Minister prepared to ensure that adequate consultation takes place with knowledgeable groups in the province?
Mr. Speaker, that's precisely what we have done. There was a draft program of studies prepared by a committee of teachers drawn from around the province, a draft program of studies that was released in January of 1989. It went out for public review to teachers, to university professors, and to others in the community. And we've had a lot of comment, Mr. Speaker, a lot of strong response, some 600 in number. And what we're going to do is obviously we have our work cut out for us because there was a lot of criticism for what we've done. But we're taking that back and redrafting at that committee level the science curriculum, and we'll go back and we'll test the waters again with the scientific and business community as well as the academic community. And we will do it until we have done it right, Mr. Speaker, done it right so that we've got a program that's good for all children in our high school, not only the children that go on to university, but all of the children in our high schools.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. It's been reported the Minister is persisting in having the new science curriculum introduced in the fall of 1989. Is he prepared to reconsider that decision?
Mr. Speaker, we have delayed implementation of this new program of studies for 1 year. And clearly, we need to improve the program of studies, but we are committed to continuing with this approach to a better scientific education for our young people. And we're going to make sure that we've got the program of studies in place. We're going to make sure that we've got the proper textbooks and learning materials in place. We're going to make sure that the university community is on side. But Mr. Speaker, most of all, what we're trying to concentrate on is what is best for students, what's best for kids. And our objective must be literacy, scientific literacy for all Albertans, but especially our young Albertans, so that they can compete in the world beyond high school.
For Vegreville, followed by Calgary-Buffalo, then Bow Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In response to my concerns about the failure of his cousins in Ottawa to deliver on their promise to provide $850 million of drought assistance to farmers early in the new year, the Minister of Agriculture stated on Friday that he would anticipate and that he was assuming that the federal government would keep their promise. How does this Minister of Agriculture justify his government's failure to stand up for Alberta farmers who he well knows needed this drought assistance cash many months ago and who, it doesn't appear, will receive it for another month or two?
Mr. Speaker, one beautiful thing about having Hansard as a record of the House is that those who are not listening have an opportunity to read later on. And I think if the honourable member from Vegreville were to read yesterday's Hansard, he will find that I reinforce the position that I did Friday, that I felt that it was my best feel that the federal government was going to come forth and fulfill the commitment it made in November of 1988.
Mr. Speaker, I shouldn't need to remind the minister that it costs a lot of money to seed crops these days, and the interest rate on trade accounts is 24%. He shouldn't be twiddling his thumbs in meeting. He should get on his horse and ride. How can the farmers of Alberta trust a government that seems content to spend their time behind closed doors in secret negotiations rather than coming forward and delivering on this promise?
Mr. Speaker, I am not aware of any promise that this government has not delivered on to the agricultural community. I spent a fair number of hours last evening with the Alberta Cattle Commission, 3 hours this morning with the pork producers of this province, and I didn't run into one of them that was critical of our agricultural programs or the fulfillment of our commitments.
with respect, Mr. Minister, that doesn't put any money into the pockets of farmers who need that assistance. Is this minister willing to agree to commit the taxpayers of Alberta to help fund Brian Mulroney's campaign promises if the federal government agrees to change the method of payment of the Crow benefit?
Mr. Speaker, again, I would refer to my first response. If the honourable member had listened yesterday or would read answer today, he would know that I have said all I am going to say at this point in time about any negotiations that are underway.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Education, we've had an announcement today that the Minister has suspended the teaching certificate of a Mr. Lou Little, who taught in the Waldorf private school in Calgary from 1986 to 88 and in the Waldorf alternative program under the Edmonton Public Board from 81 to 85. Now, the mental and physical abuse of students which went on is shocking, and Alberta parents need to know what went on, why it took so long to get Mr. Little out of the classroom, what monitoring goes on in private schools, who's responsible for alternative programs.
There are 3 or 4 questions at once. So one question was heard. Perhaps the minister could respond to that. Order, please, honourable member. Mr. Minister, to the first question. Honourable member. Minister, to the first question, please.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry I couldn't discern all of the questions that the member was asking, but I can say that we have suspended a teaching certificate of Mr. Little following a very extensive, comprehensive review by the Council on Alberta Teaching Standards. They received a complaint, a formal complaint, in June of 1988, by which time Mr. Little had left the Waldorf school for good. The complaint was investigated. A series of hearings was completed, and 2 days ago, I received on my desk a recommendation that his teaching certificate be suspended. I signed that and have so directed that it happen.
This matter went on for 7 years under spectacular and distressing conditions, and I'm wondering what the minister is going to do to ensure that the full facts of this matter become public, that they aren't shuffled under the carpet.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the full facts are out. Mr. Little is no longer teaching in this province and will not be allowed to teach in this province again until he has served a minimum of 1 year of supervised practice review teaching. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, that it is unlikely that under the circumstances that Mr. Little would be able to get a contract with a local school board. But, Mr. Speaker, we have before us an opportunity to review not just to identify excellent teachers, as we are now able to do under the Council on Alberta Teaching Standards, but we are now able to review the competency and the skills of teachers through this same process. And that gives an open window of confidence by parents and by the general public that we have an ability to look at and review the practice of teachers and practice of teaching to make sure that we have the best ones in our system.
This isn't the lottery fund. It's not good enough to deal with this matter in the back rooms. This is our children. And I wonder what the minister is going to do to improve the monitoring of private schools and alternative schools and public programs to see that people like Mr. Little are not able to abuse our children year after year after year for 7 years as took place in this situation.
Mr. Speaker, obviously the lawyer member across would choose his words very carefully. We are talking here about teaching competence and the skills of a teacher, and that is what the Council on Alberta Teaching Standards will and must review. The Alberta Teachers Association, as a professional organization, has a responsibility to review professional conduct, and I look to the Alberta Teachers Association to exercise its full responsibility, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah, stick to rock concerts, Sheldon.
Followed by Edmonton Beverly.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Municipal Affairs. Some time ago, the Alberta government announced a pilot project for senior citizens housing. This is a small, compact housing unit that is kept in the backyard of family or a friend for seniors to live in close to where they have someone to communicate with. Could the minister tell us where this project is at this time?
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the question from the honourable member from Bow Valley. One of the things that I have found in my entrance and association with this government is that they are in continuous pursuit of new ideas and new programs that are unique and also meet some very basic requirements to meet the needs of our senior citizens in this province of Alberta. The Garden Suite program that the honourable member is talking about, Mr. Speaker, meets two very basic requirements. One is that it fulfills accommodation, but secondly, it gives that extra capability of care for the senior citizens next to their children or grandchildren. These homes are going to be located, 3 of them in terms of the pilot project, will be located in the urban center of the city of Lethbridge. 3 others will be located in the rural area or in the county of Parkland.
Okay, he answered my second supplementary as a minister from the House of the... Mr. Speaker, I would also like to ask him what the cost of these pilot projects, housing units, are going to be, and who is going to pay for them. That's 2 questions of this.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable members of the opposition are going to allow me 3 answers, and I appreciate that. The net cost of these projects over the 3 years of the pilot project will net out at about $228,000. The actual rental rates that we will charge will go towards a repayment of a major portion of that sum of money again. The ownership of the units will be maintained by the Department of Municipal Affairs.
Followed by Calgary Glenmore, then Calgary McKnight.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to direct my questions today to the Minister of Education. This government has promised repeatedly that Albertans would not be subjected to tax increases. And for every time we hear this promise, we can again point to another example where promises have been broken. On May 31st, the Minister's Department distributed notices to municipal secretaries across the province. This notice set out that the School Foundation Program Fund mill rate for 1989 was going to increase by 0.4 mils. Because the government failed to notify the municipalities about this increase before the May 1st deadline, municipalities across the provinces have had not the opportunity to raise their taxes and thus do not have the revenue to pay for this increase. My question to the Minister, Mr. Speaker, is from what source does he expect the municipalities to acquire the increased payments demanded by the government?
Yeah.
The increase was announced at the end of May. It was the first increase. There was no increase in 1987 or in 1988. This is the first one since 1986, and that mill rate increase will be applied to businesses and in the industrial assessment, and municipalities will be expected to collect that tax for payment of education, for the cost of education across the province.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the difficulty is that municipalities weren't advised in proper time. Why is this government punishing the municipalities by breaking its promise of no tax increases and forcing them to dip into their own savings now?
Well, Mr. Speaker, they will not have to dip into their own savings.
Where's the money tree? Well, Mr. Speaker, given that the Minister's Department failed to notify the municipalities the increase before the deadline, will the Minister now agree to rescind the proposal for the increase in the School Foundation Program Fund mill rates?
No, Mr. Speaker, I wouldn't, but I still cannot understand how the New Democratic Party, the NDP position, would be that they would want to control the amount of expenditures at the local level. And that's precisely what the honourable member is saying. He's saying, let's put a cap on the cost of education, and we'll impose that from this legislature. That's a strange position that party would be putting forward, Mr. Speaker.
But expected. Dump it quick. Thank you, members. Thank you, all members. Calgary-Glenmore, followed by Calgary-McKnight, Stony Plain, Red Deer North, Calgary-Mountain View, Edmonton-Meadowlark, Clover Bar, Edmonton-Belmont, Calgary-Northwest, Edmonton-Millwoods. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, prior to the election, in the throne speech and now in the budget speech, there was an announcement of 2 new programs to provide measure of relief for small Alberta businesses: the Small Interest Shielding Program and the Alberta Capital Loan Guarantee Program. And there doesn't seem to be any activity in these programs. Will the Minister of Economic Development and Trade indicate to this Assembly the status of these programs?
Good question. Good question.
Mr. Speaker, we hope to have announcements relating to both programs prior to the end of the month.
Could the Minister indicate why there is this lengthy delay?
Mr. Premier, Mr. Speaker, we're in the process of putting together the application forms, negotiating with the financial institutions, and we want to make sure that we have the complete package ready so that those individuals who do wish to participate in these programs will have access to them when we make the announcement as to all the final details. I should share with the honourable member, as it relates to the interest shielding program, there will be a retroactivity back to 1st of March.
Is the department still accepting applications for these programs?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, it is our hope to have it for a period of 2 years, whereby we will accept applications for that time period.
Calgary-McKnight, Stony Plain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Education. As mentioned earlier, the Department of Education has been attempting to impose a new science curriculum on Alberta high schools, despite widespread opposition from science teachers in both the secondary and post-secondary systems. And I am pleased that the Minister is beginning to recognize the importance of this issue and the need for consultation on questions of major curriculum development by announcing a review panel, which he did earlier today. Can the Minister indicate on what basis the members of this advisory panel will be selected?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I spoke of the process by which we build curriculum in the province. We have a committee of teachers, science teachers from across the province, who build curriculum on the basis of advice and input they receive from educators and others across the province. And this is a committee of teachers that design curriculum. Their first draft of the first program of studies for Science 10, 20, and 30 and the chemistry and biology and physics courses, these programs of studies were released in January of 1989. We have received over 600 comments and replies on these programs, some of them very critical. We're taking that same committee is taking that advice and applying it to these programs, and we will be releasing a second draft program of studies in all of those courses sometime over the next 6 weeks.
Thank you. Supplementary to the Minister. Is this advisory committee going to be given authority to actually recommend significant changes based on their findings in this science curriculum, or is this going to be a public relations exercise to allay the fears of the critics?
Well, Mr. Speaker, this committee has been in place since we began the entire exercise. This is a committee of science teachers and others from across the province who are expert in the teaching of science education. These are teachers This is no exercise that the honourable member is suggesting, and it has been in place since day one. They have drafted a program of studies. The program of studies has gone out. We're now receiving comments back in, some 600 in number. We're taking those comments and using the substance of them to rewrite the curriculum. And once that is done, then that second draft program of studies will go out again for public consultation. And we will continue to consult with the public and consult with educators, both university professors and teachers, and the business and science community in this province until we've got it right.
Final question. This leads exactly into my final question, Mr. Speaker. There used to exist in Alberta an entity called the Curriculum Policies Board, which allowed interested stakeholders direct input into the decision-making process as it affects curriculum development. Unfortunately, this board was dismantled in the early 1980s, and fiascos such as this current science curriculum are the result. Will the minister commit to immediate reinstitution of the Curriculum Policies Board to avoid any further such problems?
No, Mr. Speaker, I will not, because the flexibility, the strength of our curriculum writing exercise is that we can draw experts and people wise in the field of social studies, science, home economics, physical education, or any other subject. We can bring those people to a committee to help us build curriculum. And rather than rely on one set fixed group of people, I would rather be able to go and call upon experts in that field to advise us on the specialty, the field that they know best. And that provides us with some of the very best curriculum that you will find in this country.
That's right. Stony Plain, followed by Red Deer North, then Calgary Mountain View, Edmonton Meadowlark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I guess the honourable member from across the way has poor hearing. That wasn't the question yet. It's becoming painfully clear to me, Mr. Speaker, that the local taxpayers cannot trust this government to deal fairly with their own local levels of government. The Minister of Education has ignored the County of Parkland's detailed briefs on the cost of the creation of the new school division of Twin Rivers. In addition, officials from Alberta Education over the past couple of years have assured the county that, in fact, they would benefit from such a creation. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'm aware that there are deficits here and deficits there and definitely deficits in this particular government. My question to the Minister of Education is this: why is the Minister of Education attempting to shift the burden of its deficit and also of its errors in judgment onto the shoulders of those municipalities affected by this particular tax increase by not providing sufficient funding to adequately keep the tax increases from jumping to 30 to 60%? From 30 to 60%, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, typical of the members of the opposition, they don't have their facts straight on this one. And that in fact, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, there is a shortfall in the County of Parkland's budget this year, but it relates to a number of factors, and perhaps the honourable member might want to do his own homework with his own constituents before he brings Parkland problems into this legislature. Because in fact, a new municipal district of Brazeau and a Twin Rivers school division was created. Out of that creation of a new school division, Parkland lost some assessment, lost a fair amount of assessment because of the wealth of the Drayton Valley area. But in fact, Mr. Speaker, with our $3.75 million transitional grant, one-time 5-year transitional grant, we have more than paid for the cost and the loss attributed to the lost assessment to the County of Parkland. So, Mr. Speaker, I'd suggest the honourable member go back and find out what accumulated deficits the Board of Education and the County of Parkland have acquired, and how they're going to do their own homework to eliminate those deficits.
Mr. Speaker, I have been doing my homework. I have attended 4 out of 5 meetings. I'm attending one tonight. Well, if you're so quick for the question, here it is. Are you prepared, after you have reviewed the real figures, to extend your transitional grants for additional 4 years to make sure that the County of Parkland, which includes 4 constituencies, does not continue to suffer?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member should go back and review the history of this, because, in fact, the County of Parkland enjoyed a surge of assessment in 1988 due to the taking in of Range 11, which had never been part of the County of Parkland, and that, in fact, the county did not account for that in 1988, and as a result reduced its taxes and the requisition. And so taxpayers this year are not only making up for that lost assessment, but they are also paying for an accumulated deficit, which the County of Parkland Board of Education has acquired. But the dollars, the lost revenue attributed to the lost assessment area that has gone to the Twin Rivers School Division, that lost revenue has been fully compensated for by this provincial government.
Right on.
Mr. Speaker, please bear with me. I'm new at this game. I'll give you the question. The shortfall in budgeting was due to a reduction in funding for 86-87. However, since I've been attending these public meetings, the question that I'm coming to the question, if you'll bear with me. The city of Spruce Grove, due to the large tax increases, is now threatening, Mr. Speaker, to withdraw from the county system of education, thereby increasing educational costs to the County of Parkland and the city of Spruce Grove. Are you prepared, Mr.
Honourable member, thank you. We are at the question. Great, let's go.
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to rely upon the locally elected citizens to make sure that their political leaders in those communities make decisions that are wise and responsive to the needs of the people in those communities. And where this government has a responsibility, and in this case, helping and assisting the County of Parkland to make up for the lost revenue due to the lost assessment due to the creation of the Twin Rivers School Division, we have contributed $3.75 million, one-time 5-year transitional grant, to assist them to get over that hurdle. So the provincial government has done more than its share. Now it's time for the leadership within the County of Parkland to do its share.
Right.
North, followed by Calgary Mountain View.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question's to the Minister of Health and deals with diabetic services. The Aids to Daily Living program presently covers most of the costs that are associated with the traditional monitoring strips that diabetics formerly use, but it does not cover the cost of the blood monitoring strips. Most diabetics now choose to use these blood monitoring strips, but they must pay an average monthly cost of approximately $68 a month since they're not covered in the same manner. Will the minister consider a change of policy which would bring financial relief to those diabetics now using these blood monitoring strips?
Mr. Speaker, since I became Minister of Health in September of 1988, I've had a number of discussions with Albertans around the province about how pleased they are to have the Alberta Aids to Daily Living and the Extended Health Benefits program that we are able to offer in this province. Nonetheless, I believe it's very important that we look at the resources we are dedicating to that program to ensure that we're meeting the most pressing needs of Albertans and getting the best value for the resources that we're dedicating to it. And as a result, I am looking at ways to review, if you like, the services offered under ADL in order to make them more contemporary and more consistent with the needs of Albertans.
Well, Mr. Speaker, in that vein, in the light of advancing technology, will the minister also look at the implications of financial relief for for the majority of diabetics now using the advanced pen type of needle rather than the traditional syringes, which actually cost more money?
Mr. Speaker, that's certainly part of the overall review, the program review, if you like, that was outlined in the Provincial Treasurer's address last Thursday night. Again, I believe there are ways that we can ensure that we're meeting the most pressing need and getting the best value for the close to $46 million that we're dedicating to the program, and certainly building the diabetic maintenance program into that is certainly part of my review.
Mr. Speaker, can the minister tell us, since Red Deer is the only city of its size without an actual diabetic metabolic center, is the minister prepared to consider the financial implications of a community proposal for the development of such a center in Red Deer?
Mr. Speaker, I am aware that there are some diabetic metabolic services offered outside of the hospital complex in Red Deer. And certainly I believe it's the kind of facility, certainly we've seen it operating in other centers in our province, that very well lends itself to the community structure as opposed to necessarily a hospital structure. Nonetheless, in the budget planning which is now occurring in the hospital and the community health sector for the 1990-91 fiscal year, I would certainly be prepared to look at a proposal which was made by the community in conjunction with the medical staff in that community.
Thank you. Time to question period has expired. One point of order, Calgary Buffalo.
I'm going to pass on the point of order, Mr. Speaker.